My brother handed me a legal document at my own engagement party while everyone watched. I remember staring at the pages, not understanding at first. The room was full of people, my fiancé's family, our friends, people who had driven hours to be there. My mother was standing by the dessert table with her arms crossed like she was waiting for a bus. My brother was smiling the way he always smiled when he thought he'd already won something. "Just sign it," he said. "It's not a big deal." I looked down at the document again. $58,000. My grandfather's savings account, the one he had kept for 31 years, the one he told me about when I was 12 years old, sitting on his porch drinking sweet tea. He said, "Fiona, this is yours someday. Don't let anyone tell you different." My grandfather had been dead for 11 days. I need to back up. I grew up in a house where my brother could do no wrong. His name is Brandon, and he is 4 years older than me, and from the time I can remember, everything in our family orbited around him. His baseball games, his grades, his moods, his future. I don't say this with bitterness anymore. I've had enough therapy to say it plainly, like a fact. The sky is blue. Water is wet. Brandon was the favorite. I was the quiet one. The one who made decent grades without anyone noticing. The one who learned early that if you needed something, you figured it out yourself. Because asking meant being compared to Brandon and coming up short. The one thing I had that Brandon never touched was my grandfather. Grandpa Theodore, everyone called him Theo, lived 40 minutes away in a small house with a garden he tended every morning before 6 a.m. He grew tomatoes and peppers and one very stubborn fig tree that never produced enough figs to justify itself, but he watered it anyway. He told me once that some things in life you take care of because they need caring for, not because they give you something back. I spent more weekends at his house than at my own. When I was in college and completely overwhelmed, I would drive to his house and sit in his garden, and he would bring out 2 glasses of tea, and we would not always talk. Sometimes we just sat. He came to my college graduation when my parents said they were too busy. He sent me a card when I got my first job offer. A real card, handwritten, with a $20 bill tucked inside, and a note that said, "Buy yourself something that has nothing to do with work." He was the only person in my family who saw me as a complete person. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 14 months before he died. I drove to his house every weekend during that time. I organized his medications. I took him to appointments when he stopped being able to drive. I sat with him through the bad nights, the ones where the pain was bad enough that he couldn't sleep, and we watched old game shows with the volume low. My parents came twice in 14 months. My brother came once, for Easter, and left after 3 hours because his kids had soccer. I am not saying this to keep score. I am saying it because it matters to what happened next. Grandpa Theo died on a Tuesday in October. He died quietly, which was a mercy. I was there. My mother and father arrived 2 hours later. Brandon and his wife showed up the following day. The funeral was small, the way Grandpa wanted. He had written everything down. He had a plan for his house, his car, his tools. He had a plan for almost everything. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that he had a separate savings account that had never been mentioned in the family. $58,000, saved over 31 years. A separate account, listed in a handwritten amendment to his will, left entirely to me. I found out from his attorney, a quiet older man named Mr. Aldrich, who called me 3 days after the funeral. He read me the relevant section of the will. He explained that Grandpa Theo had added the amendment 2 years prior, witnessed and notarized, completely legal. He said, "Your grandfather was very clear about his wishes." I sat in my car in a parking lot and cried for 20 minutes. Then I called my mother to let her know, because I thought that was the right thing to do. That was my mistake. By the following morning, Brandon had already called me 4 times. I didn't answer. He texted, "We need to talk about Grandpa's account. Family meeting this weekend." I texted back, "I'm still processing. Can we give it a few weeks?" He did not respond to that. Instead, my mother called. My mother has a specific voice she uses when she wants something. It is softer than her regular voice, almost gentle, which is how you know it's serious. She used that voice now. She said that of course I deserved to grieve. Of course she understood this was an emotional time. But the family needed to think practically. Grandpa Theo's house had a mortgage that wasn't fully paid off, and Brandon had been planning to help cover the remaining balance, and with everything going on financially, it would really mean a lot if I could contribute to keeping things manageable for everyone. I said, Grandpa's house doesn't have a mortgage. He paid it off in 2019, he told me himself. A pause. Well, she said, there are other expenses. I said I needed time to think. She said of course. Take all the time I needed. Brandon called again that night. He didn't use the soft voice. He said the $58,000 should be considered family money. He said Grandpa Theo wasn't in his right mind at the end, and the amendment was probably added under emotional circumstances. He said I needed to think about what was fair. I said, I need to go. He said, Fiona, don't be selfish about this. I hung up. I want to be honest about what those weeks felt like. There was grief underneath everything else. This constant low hum of missing Grandpa Theo, missing the way he smelled like garden soil and coffee, missing the particular way he laughed at his own jokes before he finished telling them. And layered on top of that grief was this other thing. This sick, tired recognition that I had been through a version of this before. When I was 18, I had saved up for 2 years to buy a used car. My parents borrowed it for Brandon when his broke down and he needed to get to a job interview. That was fine, temporarily. Then the loan became permanent. Then Brandon wrecked it, and my father told me it had been technically in the family's name, so insurance paid for a replacement for Brandon. When I was 23, I had a small savings bond my grandmother on my father's side left me. My parents asked me to put it toward a family vacation. I said yes because I didn't know yet that I was allowed to say no. This is the pattern. It had a name now. I had learned the name in therapy, and I said it quietly to myself in my apartment, while Brandon's texts accumulated unread on my phone. My fiancé, his name is Joel, sat with me through all of it. He held my hand and listened and didn't tell me what to do. He said, whatever you decide, I'm with you. Which is probably the most important thing a person has ever said to me. We had been engaged for 3 months. We had chosen a venue. We were planning a small party at his parents' house to celebrate with family, both sides, before the wedding. I should have known better than to let my family into something I loved. The engagement party was a Saturday in November. Joel's mother, a warm, generous woman who makes her own pasta and genuinely likes people, had decorated her backyard with string lights and paper lanterns. There were maybe 40 people there, a real number, a number that fits in a backyard. Joel's siblings, his cousins, a few of our close friends, and my family. My mother, my father, Brandon, and Brandon's wife Courtney. I watched them arrive, and I watched my mother assess Joel's family's house, and I watched Brandon shake hands with Joel's father in that way Brandon has, the slightly too firm handshake of a man who wants you to know he is important. I told myself it would be fine. I told myself to be present. This was my party. This was supposed to be a good night. For the first 2 hours, it was. Then, during a lull between dinner and dessert, Brandon appeared at my elbow. He had a manila envelope in his hand. He said, I need 5 minutes. I said, Brandon, this is not the time. He said, it'll take 5 minutes. And then he said it louder, and Joel's mother heard, and some people turned, and the moment had that terrible quality of already being in motion, already too public to stop without a scene of its own. I took the envelope. Inside was a document, several pages, dense with language, and at the top it said, Voluntary Transfer of Assist, and at the bottom there was a line for my signature. He had drafted a document. He had actually hired someone to draft a document, transferring Grandpa Theo's savings account to a family trust controlled by him. I looked up from the pages. My mother was standing 15 feet away looking at a paper lantern like it was the most interesting thing in the room. My father had his hands in his pockets. Courtney was refilling her wine. Joel was beside me now. He had appeared without me noticing, the way he does, and he was reading over my shoulder and I felt his hand settle on my lower back. Brandon said, "It's the fair thing to do, Fiona. Grandpa Theo would have wanted the whole family taken care of." I said, "Grandpa Theo would have wanted the whole family taken care of." I said, "Grandpa Theo wrote his wishes down. With a lawyer. With a notary." Brandon said, "He was sick. He wasn't thinking clearly. He was clear enough to specify my name. Fiona." His voice dropped. The smile stayed. "Don't make this a whole thing in front of everyone. Just sign it and we move on." I looked around the yard. Joel's family was trying not to watch. Our friends were very still. My father was studying his shoes. My mother had moved slightly further away, as if proximity to this moment might implicate her. I handed the envelope back to my brother. I said, "No." He laughed. It was a short, disbelieving sound. He said, "Excuse me?" I said, "I'm not signing anything tonight. I'm not signing anything at all. Grandpa Theo left that account to me. His attorney has the documentation. I'm going to honor what he wanted." Brandon's smile went somewhere else. He said, "You're really going to do this here?" I said, "You brought this here, not me." My mother materialized. She said quietly, "Fiona, please don't cause a scene." And something happened in me then, something I had been waiting a long time to feel. It was not rage, it was quieter than rage. It was clarity. I said, "I didn't cause anything. I came to celebrate my engagement. If you wanted to talk about Grandpa's will, you had 3 weeks and you chose this moment on purpose. I think that says everything." Brandon said I was being dramatic. I said, "I hope you enjoy the rest of the party." And I walked back to Joel's side and I stayed there for the rest of the night. My mother left early. Brandon and Courtney left 30 minutes after that. My father stopped by me on his way out, and for a moment I thought he might say something real, something I could hold on to. He patted my arm. He said, "It's a lot of money, Fiona." I nodded. He left. Joel's mother brought me a piece of the chocolate cake she had made herself and sat with me in the kitchen while everyone else was still in the backyard, and she didn't say anything about what had happened. She asked me about the venue we had picked. She asked what flowers I was thinking about. I have thought about that kitchen moment many times since. The simple mercy of being treated like a person who was planning a wedding, not a person who had just survived something. 3 days later, the calls started. My mother, 4 times on Monday. Brandon, twice. Courtney, once, which surprised me. We had never been close, and the call felt like an extension of Brandon wearing a different face. My father called once, and when I answered he said, "Your mother's upset." And I waited and he didn't say anything else. By the end of the first week, I had 37 missed calls across the 4 of them. I called Mr. Aldrich, the attorney. I told him what had happened. He was not surprised in the way lawyers are sometimes not surprised by things they have seen before. He advised me to document everything, to save all messages, and he confirmed that the amendment to Grandpa Theo's will was ironclad. He used that word, ironclad. He said there was no legitimate legal avenue for contesting it, given the circumstances of its creation. He also said something I had not expected. He said that Grandpa Theo had come to him with very specific instructions, that he had said, "My family will make this complicated. I want to make sure it can't be." I had to sit with that for a while. Grandpa Theo knew. He had seen the pattern the same way I had eventually learned to see it. And he had done what he could, from where he was, to give me something that couldn't be taken. I stopped answering calls from my mother and Brandon. I sent one text to my mother that said, "I am not going to discuss Grandpa's estate. His wishes were documented and legal. I'd like some space right now." She responded 12 minutes later with a paragraph about how she had given her entire life to raising me, and she deserved more consideration than this. She said the word selfish twice. She mentioned that Brandon had a family to support. I read it once. I did not respond. The calls continued. By the end of the second week, it was closer to 60 across all of them. My phone had a do not disturb setting I had never used before. I used it now. Brandon sent a formal letter, an actual letter. mailed to my apartment, from what appeared to be a legal service, suggesting that the amendment to the will had been signed under undue influence and that he was exploring his options. Mr. Cayley. Aldrich reviewed it and said it was a template letter with no real backing, likely meant to frighten me into settling. He said if I wanted, we could respond formally. He said we would win. I said, let's respond. There is a strange kind of quiet that comes after you stop fighting. Not the quiet of defeat. A different kind. The quiet of a decision that has already been made. I moved the money from Grandpa Theo's account into a new account that only I had access to. I put a portion of it toward the wedding. A thing he would have loved, I think, to know. I put some aside for the future. I kept a small amount liquid because Mr. Aldrich's fees were real, and I was not going to pretend otherwise. I put $40 into a fig tree from a nursery and planted it in the small concrete planter on my apartment balcony. It is not practical. It may never produce enough figs to justify itself. But I water it every morning before I leave for work. Joel thinks it's funny. He says it's the most stubborn plant he's ever seen. I told him that's why I like it. My parents and I are not in contact right now. I have not made any dramatic declarations. I have not sent any speeches or ultimatums. I simply am not available, and I've noticed that not being available does not require an explanation to anyone. Brandon's legal posturing went nowhere. Mr. Aldrich sent a firm letter. The response from Brandon's side was silence. He did send one final text. It said, "You got what you wanted. I hope it was worth it." I thought about it for a day. I thought about the garden, and the sweet tea, and the game shows with the volume low, and the card with the $20, and the way Grandpa Theo said, "Don't let anyone tell you different." I thought about the engagement party, the paper lanterns, Joel's hand on my back, the chocolate cake in the kitchen. I wrote back, yes. It was. Then I put my phone down and went to water my fig tree. I've thought a lot about what Grandpa Theo said to Mr. Aldrich when he went in to update his will. My family will make this complicated. I want to make sure it can't be. He knew. He had watched the same pattern play out for decades, watched things I earned or was given quietly disappear into the family machinery. And he decided, from his garden, at whatever age and in whatever amount of pain he was in, to do something about it. That is not luck. That is a person who paid attention and acted on what he saw. And I think about the kind of character it takes to do that quietly, without announcing it, without making it a confrontation. He didn't call a family meeting. He didn't send a letter. He sat with an attorney, and he made something ironclad, and then he came home and watered his fig tree. I spent a long time believing that keeping the peace was the same as being good, that absorbing what was taken from me, the car, the savings bond, the small erasures that happened so regularly I stopped noticing them, was a kind of maturity. Gracious, my mother would have said. You're being gracious. But there is a difference between grace and disappearance. I didn't learn that distinction until I was standing in a backyard full of string lights, holding a manila envelope. And I felt something in me go very still and very clear. What my brother did at that party was not a lapse in judgment. It was the result of 30 years of being told that what belonged to me was negotiable. Every time my family reached into my life and took something and faced no consequence, the behavior grew. Actions compound. The envelope at my engagement party didn't appear from nowhere. It was the logical end of a long sequence of smaller moments that I had let pass in the name of keeping things calm. That is the part I sit with. Not anger at Brandon, not even grief about my parents, but a quiet reckoning with the times I said yes when I should have said no, and what that yes taught everyone around me about what I would tolerate. Joel stood beside me that night without being asked. He read that document over my shoulder, and he didn't say a word until I needed him to. That is the other thing I think about, that the people who actually see you don't need to announce it. They just show up and stand there. Grandpa Theo saw me. Joel sees me. Those are two people. Two people is not nothing. Two people, across a lifetime, can be everything. I planted that fig tree because I needed something to tend that was purely mine. Something that didn't owe anyone anything, that existed only because I chose to keep it alive. It hasn't produced much yet. Maybe it won't for years. But every morning I water it and I think about what it means to take care of something, not because it gives you something back, but because it matters. That is what I want to carry forward. Not bitterness, not the closed door of no contact as a wound I keep reopening. Just the dailiness of tending what is real, what is true, what Grandpa Theo believed I deserved when he sat down with that attorney and made something that couldn't be taken. He was right, and I'm finally letting myself believe it.